Okay, I want to share some data tools with you, some neat data tools and some things that I have found have been very helpful. I lived in Georgia for 5 years, and I was very lucky. I had a $500,000 a year grant to provide behavior intervention services to the entire state. I had 5 full-time behavior specialists who worked for me. If you had a kid that had behavior, you could send in a referral, and for free, one of my behavior specialists would come out to your school. We would sit down with the behavior support team. We would brainstorm. We would decide, how are we going to do this functional behavior assessment? Do we need to do a functional, because sometimes we could get there and see right away what the issue was. We didn't have to do a full-blown functional behavior assessment. And we would stay with you until we had at least an 80% decrease from baseline. We were hoping for 100%, but every once in a while, 80% or better. We averaged 5.5 months with each student. We were only able to see students once per month because I had 5 full-time behavior specialists. The very first year, we served 12 students because nobody knew we were there, nobody knew we were free, and nobody knew we were good. So we could use regular ABC data collection forms. That was very, very easy. Well, the second year, people figured out we were there, we were free, and we were good. My behavior specialists were awesome. And we went to 500 kids a year. So each one of my behavior specialists carried a caseload of about 100 kids over the course of a school year. And we worked year-round, so we worked in summer school as well. So that was spread out over 12 months. But that's a lot of kids to be working with. So we had to come up with a way to get good data. And what do we all know about going in and observing a student? What happens when you go in to observe a student? They have the best day they ever had in their entire life. It's called observation cures. I just 2 weeks ago went to go observe a student, little girl, 8 years old, has schizophrenia, has a schizophrenic episode every single day. Had never, ever, ever had a day that she did not have a schizophrenic episode at school. I go spend a day from the minute she walks in until the minute she leaves. She goes all day with no schizophrenic episodes. So they just asked if they could have a picture of me to hold up in the back of the room, because obviously I just scared the poor child to death because she just had the smoothest day. And that's what always happens. Now, I know these people are telling me the truth about the behavior, so we were able to come up with a plan, but that is what happens, observation cures. So I really like for everybody who's with the child to take their own data. I don't like somebody following this kid around with a stopwatch and a clipboard and pencils and strings hanging off. Because by the 3rd hour of the day, the kid figures out who you're there to watch. No matter what story you make up, the kid knows they're being watched, and they either give you nothing or they give you so much you can't write fast enough because they want to make sure you get enough. I've tried all kinds of different tips. Oh, I'm going to teach 8th grade math next year. Oh, I'm going to teach 8th grade social studies next year, too. They don't buy it. And they'll send spies out to walk by, your desk where you're sitting and see what you're really there for, and that it spreads through the room. So we had to come up with something that actual classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, anybody who was with a child could write down the data and give us some good information that we could actually make an analysis from or an assessment from, based on what they gave us. And so we came up with something that we really like. I want you to think of yourselves this way, and I think you should share this with the whole behavior support team, the parents. We talk about CSI, CSI agents, crime scene investigators. Well, we aren't CSI agents, crime scene investigators. We are causal science investigators. We're looking at the function behind the behavior. Why is this behavior showing up in our classroom? Why is it showing up on this side of our boat at this particular time? What has the kid learned? What are they trying to get out of? What are they trying to get? And under what conditions is it showing up? And so that's what we're really doing. Now I want you to meet a real kid, and in your book on page 31, because I know this is a lot and it's hard to read, it's a little clearer. And I'm just going to let you read page 31, This is a real kid. I just changed his name to Richie Cunningham. Everybody knows I changed that name, right? It's not really his name. I used to call him Ralph, and then somebody knew a Ralph, and they said it sounds too much like their Ralph, so I changed him to Richie. But I just pulled a real data file from 500 kids a year's worth of data. I'll let you read this. I'll shut up so you can read. I still see a few people reading. Is there anybody who's still reading? Okay. Obviously, Richie is a very real kid, and he's very real to me. I'm trying to help make him real to you. Now, I don't want you to sit here and go, oh, well, I work with little kids, so this can't possibly have anything to do with me. I promise you, doesn't matter what age you work with, the behaviors that Richie has and the interventions that we come up with will work for any age, and there are tons of kids with this kind of background. It wasn't very hard to dig through all the files and pick one, a different one. So you can see there's a lot of things going on with Richie, and probably the 4 Ps, if I'd have known about the 4 Ps back then, would have been great for Richie. It's been a while since I worked with Richie. Now, actually, the very first thing we always want to talk about is the student's strengths, but I needed to make Richie real to you. Now, I know you guys know that, but what happens when you sit down for a behavior support team meeting? What does everybody start talking about before you ever even get a chance to start them off? Everything that's going wrong, you know, all the behaviors. And when that happens, we get stuck down in quicksand, and we just can't get out of the quicksand. How many of you have been in a meeting while your family was having dinner? Because it lasted and lasted and lasted. Does that happen here? It happens in Kansas, it happens in Oklahoma, and it happened in Georgia. So I figure pretty much every state that happens. And it's because we started out the meeting talking about everything that was going wrong. So I thought, I'm going to prime the pump. And I like to tell people mistakes I made over my life, so that you don't have to learn from the same mistake that I have made. I went around and I told everybody before the meeting, now the first thing we're going to talk about on Wednesday is Richie's strengths. And I would go around to everybody at school and tell them that. And still, I would be a little like the last one in the room because I had 10 other things I had to do. And by the time I got in there, even though I had told everybody, we're going to talk about Richie's strengths, guess what everybody started talking about? Everything that was going wrong. So I learned to lay a piece of paper down on the table that said Richie's strengths with 4 boxes, 2 for social strengths and 2 for academic strengths. And that was a prompt to remind everybody to talk about strengths. So they'd come into the room and they'd start to talk about those things that were going wrong, but they'd see that paper and they'd start writing. So that worked a little bit, but I forgot a very important member of the team to talk to, and here's the in-service that happened to me. I was in a meeting with a high school student. High school student was there. It was very appropriate for Michael to be there. Michael's mother was there, and all of his teachers and everybody that worked with Michael was in this room. And I come in all chipper, and I go, all right, let's talk about Michael's strengths. And before another word could come out of my mouth, Michael's mother said, quite frankly, he doesn't have any. Folks, do you know how hard I had to paddle like a duck underwater to keep Michael from going through the table at his mother, because here his mother had just said in front of all of his teachers that he had no strengths. So I had forgotten a very important team member. In my mind, I assumed every parent would come with ideas about strengths for their child. So I like to share with you, whenever I've learned something the hard way, I like to share that with you so that you don't learn it the hard way, the way I learned it. So now I call the parents 2 days ahead of time, and I say, now the first thing we're going to talk about are Michael's strengths. So please bring a list of things that you know that Michael does well and has done well over the years, just to get the parents kind of boosted in the direction that I want them to go. Another thing that tends to happen in these meetings is people tend to talk about behavior this way. And raise your hand if you hear these words. The kid has bad behavior. Oh, it's going all by itself again. I thought I took care of that. Sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe my magnetic personality is making the thing. It's a joke. We'll see. I may have to kill it. Just kidding. So I don't know. I thought I took off whatever was going on. I forgot what. Oh, how many of you have heard bad behavior happen? How many of you have heard problem behavior? The kid has problem behavior. What thought starts to form in your mind when everybody in the team meeting is talking about the bad behavior and the problem behavior? What kind of kid is it? Bad kid, problem kid, numbers tattooed on their front pocket. You start to think that the kid's not the greatest kid in the world. I mean, sometimes when I get called in, especially now because I tend to get called in for really severe cases, they're talking about the kid like they're public enemy number one. And I'm thinking, there cannot be a kid that's so bad that there is no redeeming value left, that we should just kick the kid to the curb.
Because I'm itinerant, but when I first started working for the cooperative I worked for, we had this IEP meeting, and I worked with the child one-on-one, and I was sitting at this IEP meeting, and I swear they were talking about a child I had never even heard of.
Yeah. Sometimes they can make them sound like things are 10 times worse than they are. I know, like sometimes I'll show up and I go watch the kid before the meeting, and I'm like, I must have watched the wrong kid, because the kid I was watching didn't look like that. Well, I've got a trick for you. You guys, this works. When I was first going to school to learn how to be a teacher, I started out with a regular ed degree, and then I went and got special ed degrees and certifications and masters and all that to get paid more. I'll be honest. But, huh?
Of course.
Yes, of course. That was the only way to give myself a raise. But when I was taking classes to be a BD teacher, this is the way they talked about kids in the classes. The kid has problem behavior. The kid has bad behavior. So when I heard about positive behavior support, I really loved their message, because they said, you know, the kid's going to have behavior, but we aren't going to call it bad behavior anymore. We're not going to call it problem behavior anymore. We're not going to ignore it, but we're not going to call it bad behavior or problem behavior anymore. We're going to call it the behavior we'd like to target for change. And I love that, because that's a mindset change. That says, we love the kid. The kid's great. We just want the behavior to go away, not the kid. We don't really want that kid to disappear. We just want that behavior to disappear. So I wrote a whole book that's free on my website that you can download, and it's called Target the Behavior, Not the Student. So you can download that book. It has a lot of the same forms in it that I'm going to share with you today. It's just a little bit different version of Mining the Gold for kid behavior. Now, here's what I don't want you to do. Don't go to a behavior support team meeting, have a teacher say the kid has bad behavior, and you go, hey, this lady from Kansas, she told us not to talk like that, so don't talk like that about the kid, because I'll tell you what, that'll just kind of ruin your relationship with the person. So here's what I want you to do. Listen to what they're saying, and then regurgitate it this way. So the behavior you'd like to target for change is, and then label it in measurable and observable terms for them. Now here's what will happen. They will pick up your words without you ever even having to admonish them and say, don't talk that way. And before long, you will hear a behavior change happen in your whole school, where people will start talking about the behavior you'd like to target for change. If you don't believe me, just go try it. How many of you saw the Seinfeld episode where they said yada yada 30 times in 30 minutes? How many of you had never heard that word before, and several days later you caught yourself saying yada yada, and you'd never said it before? I lived in Georgia for 5 years. I know I'm going to get made fun of in Kansas, but I swear to you, I'm fixing to do things all the time. And my sister will go, is it broke? Making fun of my Georgia accent that I picked up. You pick up the words of the people that you're around. And folks, it sounds like, why is she spending all this time on this? This is a mindset change that is huge. Even though it's a tiny change, it's a huge change. From thinking, the kid's okay. I just want that behavior to go away. So start with the strengths and talk about that. Be sure and tell everybody 2 days ahead of time that you're going to talk about the strengths. So these are the things that Richie is very good at, and those are also, you already read that on page 31. And then I also like to talk about what floats this kid's boat. What could we use as a reinforcer for this kid? And now at the beginning is a really good time to be talking about that at the beginning. So he would do just about anything to play Xbox. I know that it's not Xbox anymore, there's something else, but how many of you have kids that are very motivated by Wii's or those kind of things? He loves peer attention. Anybody know some teenagers who like peer attention? Yeah. Pretty good relationship with Mr. Quinn, the assistant principal, or vice principal. He happens to be the administrator in charge of behavior, which very quickly we figured out was the reason he was getting sent to the office. This is his new male role model. He doesn't even know it yet, but this is the person he's latched onto because his stepfather was killed. He can go talk to him. This is really interesting. I read the research. We've decreased FaceTime with kids by 62% since the 1950s. When you and I were kids, we sat and faced each other and had eyeballs on each other. When we played checkers with each other, we were looking at each other. When we sat at the dining room table, we all were looking at each other. Now, kids sit side by side and play games like this. They do not sit and look at each other. I tell you that a lot of behavior shows up just because kids want eyeballs on them. I tried to order you guys eyeballs, but they were on back order. I was going to pass out eyeballs to you just to remind you that a lot of behavior shows up just because kids will take eyeballs for anything. They will take it for bad behavior just as much as they will take it for good behavior. They just are so desperate for eyeballs on them. How many of us have witnessed this at school? A mom comes up to school to pick up their kid at the end of the day, and mom's on the cell phone, and the kid's going, Mom, 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 and mom's like this, oh yeah, and just keeps talking on the phone, and this kid's so desperate, they lay down on the floor. So we know where a lot of this behavior is coming from. I wouldn't even have to collect data on that. Real quick, I know.
Can you stop that icon? It's like visual noise. It's really distracting, if you don't mind. The guy had
I can't stop him.
We'll just change it to another slide.
Yeah, I'll just go to the next slide, which luckily doesn't have any. I'm sorry. All of my icons move. At lunchtime, I can take them all out. Would that be okay?
Whatever. It's just that was constantly moving, and
Sorry.
it was really a visual distraction.
Sorry, I can relate to visual distractions. I will at lunch remove all the visuals. All right, these are Richie's behaviors. Now notice how explicit we are in the description. And the reason we have to be this explicit in the description is because on every single team, you will have an overzealous data taker. Now, sometimes they're an overzealous data taker because they want to do a good job, but other times they're an overzealous data taker because they want to fry the kid. They want the kid to look as bad as possible, so a pencil will roll off the desk, and they will go, oh, look, he threw that. You know, when really, in reality, that is not what happened. So we define verbal outburst, verbal aggression, physical aggression, and you have this on page 32 in your book, so you'll be able to look at this. How many of you do this much detail when you describe behaviors you'd like to what for change? Target. One person was listening. I'm going to test you on that at the end, so be ready. We want to do what to behavior?
Targeted.
Okay, all right, targeted for change. All right, now, if you'll look in your book on pages 34 through 43, you will see Richie's data sheet. Now, I want to show you what's different about my ABC data sheets over Alberto and Troutman's. How many of you are familiar with Alberto and Troutman's ABC data collection sheets? Nobody. That's interesting. Okay. On Alberto and Troutman's Applied Behavior Analysis for Classroom Teachers ABC data collection, if I say it that way, do you know what I'm talking about? ABC data collection. Yeah, it was the same columns, but what I tended to get was people would say the behavior started at 8:30 and ended at 9. The behavior started at 10:15 and ended at 10:45. I don't know about the kids that you guys work with, but the kids that I work with are not so compliant as that they provide those behavioral learning opportunities in convenient 30-minute increments. So what did I know about that information? It was not exactly the truth. You know, the behavior doesn't really last exactly 30 minutes. No kid has a behavior that lasts exactly the same number of time each time. And then under context activity, sometimes they'd write English, and then the next day they'd write open court. And open court has all kinds of textbooks, so then I'd have to call the teacher and say, what do you mean by? So what we do before we start collecting data, everybody that works with this kid gets a copy of this sheet for every single day. And everybody collects data only for the time they are with the student. So nobody follows this student around, and we define, what do we mean by homeroom? What do we mean by English, math, science, PE, art, all of those things. And then we talk about antecedent setting events, and I always lock this one in and make everybody put transition on there, because transition is such a big thing that causes behavior with kids. Those little transitions that happen all day long where kids have to take their books out of their desk and open them up to page 147 or do this or do that, those little changes that happen. But then the big transitions, class changing period, coming back from recess, coming back from lunch, those kind of thing, transitions. So we define all that in the meeting. Then we focus on 3 behaviors or less. And I always limit people to 3, no more than 3. I prefer 1. Just pick 1 behavior. Because I'll sit down with the teacher and brainstorm the behavior, and they'll have 8 behaviors that they want me to focus on. Folks, I can't watch 8 behaviors and take data on it, even if I'm in a room. I tried once. I had a clinic for kids with severe behavior, and I tried sitting on the other side of a one-way mirror with no distractions, and I had a kid who definitely had 8 behaviors, so I listed the behaviors and I labeled them, and I tried for 30 minutes because I thought surely for 30 minutes I could do 8 behaviors. I couldn't do it. So how on earth could you teach and collect data on 8 behaviors? So here's what I tell classroom teachers. I say, what 1 behavior, if it disappeared, your life would be better. Let's take care of that first, and then we'll go back and get the other behaviors, because here's what happens. If you take care of that 1 big behavior, a lot of times the other behaviors disappear because we're meeting the needs of the student, depending on if they were meeting the same, if the function was the same for that behavior. But especially if you've got a busy classroom, I say 1 behavior. So we did 3 with Richie. And then consequence outcome. When I ask people to tell me what their consequences are in the classroom, you know what people typically focus on? Starts with a P. Punishment. Well, consequences can be a good thing. Let's say Terry is tapping his pen on the table. Terry, can you do that? Tap your pen on the table. Now, I'm teaching, and that's good. Terry's very good. That is really starting to bother me, but I don't want to have a wreck in the classroom and call everybody's attention to this. So my first line of defense is going to be to use proximity and stand close to Terry. But let's say Terry's cold, and because I'm overweight, my body is giving off body heat. So Terry is warming up. So what's Terry going to keep doing? Yes, so my second line of defense will be to gently lay my hand on Terry's shoulder to remind him how close I am to him. But let's say Terry, he didn't get his hug from his mommy this morning, and so that hand on his shoulder, it feels kind of nice, so what's Terry going to keep doing? I've seen teachers pay off this well. That's a consequence, but it's a good consequence for the kid. So what we have to do is help everybody see that sometimes how we pay off is a good consequence for the kid. I had a teacher stand up one time in front of 500 people in the audience, and she said, "What do you do about these kids who come to class without a pencil?" And you could tell from everybody else's reaction in the audience that this was the one who stood up in every meeting and had a what if kind of thing. And I said, "Well, what do you do if you have a kid come into your class without a pencil?" She said, "I send them down to the office." And everybody just kind of, you could see they were like fighting back laughter. And I said, "Really?" I said, "How long are they gone?" She said, 20 minutes. I said, "What happens to them?" She said, "Oh, the principal gives them a good talking to." I said, "And does he give them a pencil?" She said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, what do you do about those kids?" Obviously, she's a high school teacher. You can tell by some other comments that she made. And I said, "Well, I'm going to be honest, when I taught, I had kids come to my class without a pencil. And what I did in August, I asked all the parents to send in an extra package of pencils. And then I picked out the ADHD kids and I had them sharpen the pencils when, they needed some proprioceptive input. And I kept them in a coffee can. And when a kid said, "I don't have a pencil," I'd smile at them and say, "I tried that when I was a kid and it didn't work for me. And it's not going to work for you. Here, borrow one of mine." She goes, "I can't do that." And I thought, well, maybe she has really poor kids and, they wouldn't be able to afford to send in a pencil. I said, "Well, I've also bribed kids. I've paid them, basically, for bringing me loose pencils out in the hallway. I find out what they like. If they like crossword puzzles or race cars or NASCAR, I'll make them a crossword puzzle about NASCAR. Or I'll agree to do something for them like that. I'll find something that they want on the internet, print it off, some little game or something, and I'll pay them with that for bringing me loose pencils in the hallway. How would that work?" She goes, "I can't do that." And then I thought, oh, I bet she's afraid she won't get the pencil back when the kid leaves. So I said, what you do is you take their shoe and you hold their shoe hostage, and then they won't go to their next class until they get their shoe back. So you'll get your pencil back, you give them their shoe back, they go to their next class. How would that work? She goes, "I can't do that." So now I'm ready to release the hook. I said, "Well, how come you can't do that?" She said, "Well, that would be feeding their addiction." I said, "Are they eating the pencils?" And everybody in the audience said, "She has no idea." She said, "No, their addiction to not being prepared." I said, "No, they're addicted to getting out of class. And you are feeding that addiction." I said, "I'm so surprised the whole class isn't coming without a pencil, and it takes 50 minutes to get them all back because the principal's got to talk to all these kids. And she was not very happy with me because she wanted me to say something like, chop off 5 fingers and they won't come without a pencil, or duct tape one to their hand, or I don't know what she was looking for, but it wasn't what I told her. But sometimes our consequences definitely feed the behavior that shows up. And we always feel bad when we figure out we're the reason. And I've been the reason many a time. So help your staff learn that consequences are not just punishment. Your paycheck is a consequence of working, in which case we'd all like to be consequenced better. The last column is, how did the student react to what you did? So if what you did stopped the behavior in 1 or 2 minutes, because kids need processing time, if what you did stopped the behavior in 1 or 2 minutes, you're going to code it as stopped. If it lasted after that, longer than that, you'll code it continued. And then sometimes kids ramp it up because they're having a behavior burst, and sometimes a new behavior pops up. So I'm going to let you look at pages 34 through 43, and then quickly I'm going to show you how we analyze this behavior. And then if I can get online, I'm going to show you, and I can show you without getting online, but I'm going to show you where it is. I have a tool that makes this even easier. So I'm going to make it easy, and then I'm going to make it easier. So you guys look at this while I mess with something on my computer there. And don't start analyzing the data, but you will see some patterns. Each one of these is a behavior chain. This green line's a behavior chain. Now when a behavior happens, all the teacher has to do in the heat of the moment is anywhere in the room write down which behavior showed up, what time it really started, and what time it really ended. Later on, they can go back and fill in the other columns. They don't actually have to fill all this in all at once. So they would just write down C, started at 2:54 and ended at 2:55. I could write that on my hand. I could write it on my lesson plans. I could write it on a Post-it note. I could write it anywhere. Later on, I'd go back and put this in. Now, if you have a secondary student who goes from teacher to teacher, every hour has a copy of this. At the end of the day, they turn it all into one person who tallies it all up on this sheet, and then we have a picture of the student's whole day, and nobody had to follow the student around with a stopwatch and clipboard and all of that. So I'll let you look at that. I'm going to see if I can get online so that I can show you something. And you can see at the bottom I put how many minutes they engaged in target behavior. Just look up and see what time.
So you don't give them a thing with random times. It's when it actually happens.
When it actually happens. Thank you. Okay. Do you go to the convention center one? Yeah. Oh, do I have it dead? Okay, it says I'm connected. Oh, good. Thank you. Ta-da, success. All right. Everybody's had a chance to flip through the pages and kind of look at the data. We got a lot of data. Now, what I don't want you to misrule on, I happen to have 10 days of data for Richie. Do not leave here thinking that means you have to always get 10 days of data on every student. I've been misquoted. I actually was quoted in a book as saying that you always had to collect 10 days of data. And I've actually done a data analysis in 30 minutes, watching a student and then pairing it with interviews. I've actually had a young man that actually lived with my husband and I who had bipolar condition and autism, and I had to take a year's worth of data, lay it out on a table to figure out what the pattern was to his bipolar going down and him locking into refusing to go to work and figuring out what I was going to do once I figured that out. There's no set, 3 days of data, 5 days of data, 7 days of data. Typically what research says is 10 incidents will give you enough information to be able to base the function of the behavior off of. And some kids are so compliant is that they provide those 10 incidents in 5 minutes. I don't recommend a 5-minute data collection. But the reason that we collected 10 days of data on Richie was because we thought there was a pattern to day of the week. We thought certain days of the week were more difficult for him than others. And when you think that, then 2 weeks of data is pretty good information because that gives you 2 Mondays, 2 Tuesdays, 2 Wednesdays, 2 Thursdays, and 2 Fridays. That way, if we have one Monday where he has 37 behaviors and the next Monday he has 3, I can take data a third Monday and see which one was the truth and which one was the outlier. So, and that we didn't have to do that in Richie's case. What I would like for you to do is work with the people that you are sitting closest to. And we're going to kind of go through and analyze this a little bit, and then I'm going to give you the answers, and then I'm going to let you talk about if Richie were yours, what would you do? But I want you to see what happens when you actually analyze this together as a team instead of one person analyzing it and bringing it in and saying, here's the answers. Because that's a very valuable thing to talk about. All right, so one of you is going to be the reader. The reader is going to flip through the 10 pages of data. So decide of who's doing what. The other person's going to be on page 44 and do the writing. And there might be 2 of you together, 3 of you together, 4 of you together, it doesn't matter. I'm going to help you. Sorry. No. All right, the first thing I want you to do is write down days of data, 10 days, because we happen to have 10 days of data. You don't always have 10 days, but just on page 44, where it says days of data, write down 10. Now the next one is a job for the reader. I want you to go through and count how many behaviors occurred in 10 days. So the total number of incidents. So each one of these lines is an incident. So on this first page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Flip to the next page, 8, 9. Count through all 10 days and tell your group how many behaviors occurred in 10 days. I'm going to help you with each step. I have overachievers.
Yeah, because that's us.
All right, I want to tell you why I do this. Has everybody finished counting? How many people got 38 behaviors? Anybody? You have 2 pages stuck together if you did. 41, there were 41 behaviors that occurred in 10 days. The reason I do this next step is because of what I was talking about earlier. Sometimes when you come into a behavior support team meeting, they are talking about the kid like they are public enemy number 1. And so I have you take that 41 divided by 10, and we see what we're really dealing with, folks. We are dealing with 4.1 behaviors per day. Doesn't that sound like a kid you can handle? And I think that it's a really neat thing to do because almost every time, this definitely sounds like a kid we can handle. Gosh, I had a kid who interrupted 63 times in 30 minutes, and I handled him. I can handle this kid. 4.1 behaviors per day. So it's just kind of a little mindset trick on the whole team to do this, but it's a step that I don't think a lot of people do, and I think it's a really important step to do when you're talking about it. The next thing we do is we take the total number of minutes that they engaged in behavior, and I added all this up for you. He averaged 73 minutes. 73 minutes divided by 41 means his behaviors last about 1.78 minutes, about 2 minutes. Gosh, we're talking about 8 minutes of behavior per day. Don't we feel like we can handle this kid? So this is all kind of a confidence building thing for the team. We can surely come up with a plan for a kid who has 8 minutes of behavior per day. This is what we're really dealing with, folks. So the most important thing we do, and I want to tell you, I worked for Congress in 99, 2000 on the SLIDEA project, the Study of State and Local Implementation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we went around the United States and we interviewed schools and we pulled 200 behavior intervention plans in every single state that we went to, not all from one school, but 200 behavior intervention plans. One of the states that I was sent to, all 200 behavior intervention plans were 5 steps for how to get yourself kicked out of school. I mean, it was just a Xerox copy of 5 steps for how to get yourself kicked out of school. And it happened so much in that state, the parents didn't know it was against the law. They'd never heard of free appropriate public education. And I met the mother of a 5-year-old who had been kicked out for life. With tears in her eyes, the mother told me how she'd had to quit her job and stay home to take care of her son, and he had reactive attachment disorder. Now, that state, although that sounds horrible, I don't think it's really that they meant to be that way. They just didn't understand what the heck they were supposed to be doing with data. And that's why they thought 5 steps for how to get yourself kicked out of school. I'm not allowed to ever tell what state it was, so don't come up and ask me afterwards, because I signed a paper saying I wouldn't tell anything other than I can tell in general. This is something that happened. And that's what made me develop all the trainings that I developed, because I thought, oh my gosh, I know if I found out about this, surely there are other pockets of the world where this is happening. But obviously it was rampant in that one state. And like I said, it happened so much, parents didn't know it was against the law. And they knew somebody down the street who'd had to stay home. Here's one of the most important things we need to do, and yet I meet a lot of people who can't tell me what the kid's baseline is. If you don't know where you started, how the heck do you know what you're doing is working? So baseline is so important, and we get baseline by taking the total number of minutes they engaged in target behavior divided by the total number of minutes that we observed them. So we observed them we observed Richie for 4,400 minutes, 440 minutes a day times 10. That comes out to a baseline of 1.66%. Now that's a very small number, and you might be thinking, why the heck are we doing an FBA on a kid who has 1.66% of a baseline? But let me tell you what would happen if we didn't deal, oh, that's not supposed to be there. Sorry. There was an incident that happened outside the hours, and it didn't really. behavior? Was he learning during any of those times? 333 minutes, which is really a baseline of 7.6%. Big difference there. He's not engaging in behavior, but he's missing learning time. And that's really what I want to change with Richie. I want his learning time to increase. And that's what I'm really going to measure. So sometimes you kind of have to think about extenuating circumstances so that you think about those kind of things. All right, the first thing I want you to do is the reader is going to read the time that the behavior started. It doesn't matter how long it lasted. I'm looking for the pattern of what time did that behavior specifically start. What was the trigger time? So the reader would read this, 8:15. Recorders, you're going to go to the 8:15 to 8:24 row and make one tally in the tally column. And then the reader would read 12:50. You go to this row and make a tally. You're going to go through all 10 pages. I did the first page for you. And what I want you to listen to is the conversations that start after you get finished with this. So go through all 10 pages. That's my big deal. But they'll list 8.
But if you say that, so then they kind of get the idea that I'm assuming it's attached to it.
Or I say, let's just come up with a new word that means those two together. You know, because lying on the floor, kicking and screaming together, you could call a tantrum if you define it.
But if we get this group really trained to use numbers, not to use anything vague.
Yeah.
They've really been training really highly on
Yeah.
being careful with vague terms.
Yeah.
It's very good. They've been coming, a lot of these people have been coming for a couple of years.
That's neat. I wish all the states would do this.
Me too.
Well, and his schedule is on page 32.
First bell. Okay, what gender are the teachers?
The ones that are writing him up. Mostly males.
He doesn't want to go to reading. It's a transition between, yeah, that's saying, right, it's a transition.
He also likes those teachers. I'm going to show you, because I meet with that. No, well, sort of. No, that doesn't work. His schedule is on page 32. We'll get to what it is in a little bit. But listen to the conversations that are already starting to happen in the room. Oh, look, it happens here, it happens here. Oh, look, he's good at this. This is really rich conversation about this student. And I've been doing this training since 2003 was when I started training on functional behavior assessment using this tool. And I had a school psychologist say to me one time, oh my gosh, I have never sat in a meeting where we all sat down and analyzed the data together like this. He said the conversations that happened don't ever happen when I do a behavior support team meeting. He said I typically walk in, I've already analyzed everything, I hand the answers to everybody, and I say, here's what the data show us. He said the conversations don't happen. He said the conversations happen when people are actually tallying it up and looking at it. And I had never thought about that myself. I mean, it was one of those happy accidents where that's the way I always did it because I thought, you know, this would be the best way. But I didn't know why until this person said that to me, and I thought, oh, that is so true. So I know that when I first started and I went to a behavior support team meeting, the school psychologist was typically the one who walked in, passed out everything, and we all just sat there and waited for that person.